It was just another regular night at work when things started to get weird. My name's Ben, and I work as a janitor at this old, rundown school. You know, the kind of place that looks like it hasn't seen a coat of paint in decades. I took the job because it was easy, and honestly, I needed a place to hide away from life for a while. It wasn't the best job in the world, but it paid enough to keep me going. The school was mostly quiet after hours. There were a few teachers who worked late sometimes, but most of the time it was just me. The first sign that something wasn't right came a few days into my shift. The lights started flickering, just a few flashes here and there, but it was enough to catch my attention. At first, I thought it was just a wiring issue, but it started happening more frequently. It was like the whole building was alive in some way, watching me. I started hearing footsteps down the hall when no one was there. Little things like that. Shadows in the corners of my eyes that weren't supposed to be there. One night, I was cleaning the back hall when I found something strange. I was putting away my supplies in one of the locked closets when I saw it. A janitor's uniform, a name tag that wasn't mine. I thought it was just a mix-up, maybe someone left it behind, but then I noticed a note underneath it. It was an old, worn piece of paper with a warning scribbled on it. It didn't make much sense at first, but it sent a chill down my spine. The note said, "Don't break the rules. If you do, you'll end up just like me." And right then, I knew something wasn't right. This wasn't just a regular school. There was something dark going on here. No one had ever told me about the rules when I started working here. The school didn't brief me on anything, no orientation, no warning, nothing. That night, I stayed extra late to finish up my work. As I walked through the empty halls, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was almost like someone was following me, their footsteps echoing behind me. I turned around a few times, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I kept telling myself it was nothing, just nerves. But I couldn't ignore it. I had this gut feeling that I was in over my head. The next night, it all escalated. I was mopping the floors in the main hallway when the lights flickered again. The buzzing noise they made sent a shiver down my spine, and it felt like everything around me froze for a second. My mind started racing, and that's when I remembered the second rule. If the lights flicker, stop what you're doing. I didn't know what would happen if I didn't follow the rules, but I wasn't willing to find out. I stopped dead in my tracks, and sure enough, the lights stopped flickering. The hallway was completely dark for a moment, and I could hear the buzzing of the lights slowly coming back to life. My skin prickled. Something about the atmosphere had changed, and I felt it deep in my bones. I decided to take a quick break, so I sat on a bench near the entrance. The silence was almost too much to handle, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the empty hallway. It didn't sound like they were coming from the floors above me or below. It sounded like they were right behind me. I froze, not daring to turn around. My heart was hammering in my chest. The footsteps stopped for a moment, and I could feel my skin crawling. Then they started again, this time moving closer. I remembered the third rule then. If you hear footsteps behind you in the hallway when no one is there, stop and wait. I couldn't explain it, but something in me knew I needed to follow that rule. I didn't dare move a muscle. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and I could feel the presence of someone standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. But when I turned around, nothing was there. For a few moments, it felt like I was in a nightmare. I couldn't explain what I was hearing, or why the air was so thick, like it was full of tension. I stayed frozen, just waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The hallway was empty. The footsteps had stopped, and it was like whatever was there had just disappeared. I was shaken, but I had to keep going. This place wasn't just creepy, it was dangerous. And I could feel myself slipping deeper into whatever dark history the school held. There was something more to this job than I thought, something I wasn't meant to uncover. The next few days felt like I was walking on eggshells. Every time the lights flickered, I stopped whatever I was doing. Every time I heard footsteps behind me, I froze and waited. But no matter how many rules I followed, the feeling of being watched never left. It was like something was always lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to slip up. One night, I was mopping the cafeteria floor when I noticed something strange. There, sitting on one of the tables, was a book. It wasn't there when I first came in, I was sure of it. I walked over, my curiosity getting the best of me. I didn't want to touch it. I knew better than to mess with things I wasn't supposed to, but something about it drew me in. The cover was old, the edges frayed, and it looked like it had been sitting there for years. But the moment my fingers brushed the edge, a wave of dread washed over me. It was like the air around me shifted. I could feel my heart racing, and I suddenly remembered the fourth rule. If you find a book that wasn't there before, don't read it. I quickly pulled my hand away, feeling a chill run down my spine. My palms were sweating, and my heart was pounding like a drum in my chest. I didn't know why I was so terrified of it, but something told me I had narrowly avoided making a huge mistake. The thing was, I wasn't sure if I had actually touched the book or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I looked around the room, expecting to see something, or someone, but the cafeteria was still, like the rest of the school. The silence was suffocating. I decided to leave the book alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark had just brushed against me. I grabbed my mop and bucket, heading for the back door. As I stepped into the hallway, the flickering of the lights caught my eye. I could hear the low hum of the bulbs overhead. I remembered the first rule: always clean the chalkboard at midnight. I hadn't even realized how late it was getting. I hadn't cleaned the chalkboard yet. I quickly moved toward the classroom, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. There was something so unsettling about this place, and every minute I spent in it made me feel closer to some dark truth I wasn't ready to face. I arrived at the classroom, and for a second, I stood there in the doorway, staring at the chalkboard. It was still clean, but I felt this strange pull like it was waiting for me. I couldn't explain it. My hands were trembling as I grabbed the rag and chalk. The clock was ticking closer to midnight, and I knew I had to finish this. As I wiped the board, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched again. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Every little noise echoed through the empty halls, and I felt like the walls were closing in. I glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. And that's when I saw it. A message, written in chalk, right in front of me. It hadn't been there a second ago. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just random scribbles. It was a clear message. "You're next." I could hardly breathe. My eyes were locked on the board, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. I didn't want to touch the chalk again. I didn't want to make things worse. But I couldn't look away. The message burned into my brain. It felt like the walls were pressing in on me, like the room itself was alive, feeding off the terror that had gripped my chest. I knew I had to clean the board, just like the rules said. But as I reached for the rag, something stopped me. There was a faint noise behind me, footsteps. Soft, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder, coming closer. I turned quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. But again, there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway, stretching out in front of me. I felt my pulse in my throat as I wiped the board down again, erasing the message. But even as I cleaned, I knew the truth. This wasn't over. The message wasn't just for me. It was a warning. And the worst part, I had just sealed my fate. I couldn't escape whatever had been set in motion that night. The rules had trapped me, and the chalkboard was showing me just how much. I had crossed a line, and now I had to live with the consequences. But I couldn't stop. I had to keep cleaning, keep following the rules. Because if I didn't, I knew what would happen. The next few nights passed in a blur. The rules were constantly in the back of my mind, reminding me of how close I was to crossing a line I didn't understand. I kept telling myself it was just a job, just cleaning, mopping, and taking care of the school. But every time I walked into that place, something felt off. The hairs on my neck were always standing up, my stomach always twisted in knots. One night, I was scrubbing the floors in the hall when I heard something strange. Footsteps again. This time they were heavy, deliberate. I stopped in my tracks, listening. I knew the rules by now, knew what I had to do. If you hear footsteps behind you in the hallway when no one is there, stop and wait. But my feet were glued to the floor. I was too scared to move. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear them echoing in the silence, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct told me to turn around, but I didn't. I stayed frozen. I couldn't explain it, but something in me knew that if I turned around, I'd see something I wasn't ready for. The footsteps came to a sudden stop, and for a long, agonizing second, everything was still. I slowly turned around, holding my breath. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty, just like before. But I knew better than to think I was alone. Something was in that hallway with me. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the air itself had thickened, like the shadows had grown darker. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. And then, just as quickly as they had started, the footsteps faded away. I didn't want to stick around. I turned and walked as fast as I could back toward the closet. I felt a strange compulsion to get the hell out of there, but I knew I couldn't leave. Not until I finished my job. It was almost like the building itself wouldn't let me leave. Like it was drawing me in, keeping me there. As I reached the janitor's closet, my eyes locked on something sitting on the counter. A book. It wasn't there before. The moment I saw it, a chill ran through me, and that's when I remembered the rule. If you find a book that wasn't there before, don't read it. I felt a strange pull to it. I don't know why, but I stepped closer, my hand trembling as I picked it up. My fingers brushed the cover, and I could feel something dark inside it, some kind of energy that shouldn't have been there. I quickly put the book back down. I didn't want to touch it anymore, but that nagging feeling wouldn't leave. Something was telling me that whatever was in that book, it wasn't meant to be discovered. My heart was racing as I shut the closet door and grabbed my mop. I had to keep working, keep following the rules, even if I didn't understand them. Something told me I was getting closer to something I wasn't supposed to see, something I didn't want to see. But I couldn't stop. Not now. That night felt different. The air in the school felt heavier, like something was building. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all coming to a head, and I was the only one who didn't know what was happening. The school was dark, too quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights above me as I cleaned. But the silence felt suffocating. I had just finished mopping the last hallway when I noticed something strange. The classroom door, which I'd locked earlier, was slightly ajar. I frowned, walking toward it. I knew I'd locked it, hadn't I? I couldn't remember. My mind was racing, but the door was open, and something told me to check it out. As I stepped inside, I froze. The chalkboard. It was covered in writing. Not just a message, there were several lines of text, as if someone had been scribbling on it for hours. I felt my blood run cold as I read the words. You shouldn't have ignored the rules. I quickly backed away from the board, my heart pounding. This wasn't possible. The board was clean when I left. There was no way someone could have written on it while I was gone. My stomach twisted in fear, and I looked around the classroom, expecting to see someone standing there watching me. But again, there was nothing. Just the empty classroom, the cold air, and that damn chalkboard. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the message. A part of me wanted to run, to leave and never come back. But I knew I couldn't. I had already broken the rules. And now, it seemed like the rules were coming after me. As I turned to leave, I saw something that made my heart stop. The book. It was back. The same book I had seen in the janitor's closet, the one I knew I wasn't supposed to touch. It was sitting on the desk now, as if it had appeared out of nowhere. I stepped forward, my hands shaking as I reached for it. I didn't know why I couldn't stop myself, but as soon as I touched the cover, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The air around me grew colder, the lights flickering violently overhead. I felt something shift in the room, something dark, something ancient. And then, without warning, the chalkboard started writing again. You're not leaving. I dropped the book in a panic and backed away from the desk. My breath was coming in ragged gasps as I turned and ran for the door. But the hallway was different now. The shadows were longer, the silence deeper. The building felt alive, and it was closing in on me. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was on the other side of those rules had found me, and there was no way out. I tried to shake off the panic that had gripped me, but it was no use. The air felt thick, like I was suffocating. I had barely made it down the hallway when I heard it again, the footsteps. They were louder this time, echoing through the empty halls, and they were following me. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't. But the footsteps were unmistakable, getting closer with every step I took. My heart raced, my breathing shallow. I ran faster, desperate to escape, but the closer I got to the exit, the heavier my feet felt. It was like the building was dragging me back, holding me in place, and the footsteps grew louder and louder, drowning out everything else. The floorboards creaked under the weight of whoever, or whatever, was following me, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see something, a person, a shadow, anything, but there was nothing. Just the dark, empty hallway stretching out behind me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find my voice. It was like the sound was trapped inside me, silenced by the fear creeping up my spine. As I reached the door, I stopped dead in my tracks. The hallway in front of me was no longer empty. There, at the far end, was the teacher's lounge door, wide open. I hadn't seen it open before, and something about it felt wrong. I felt a surge of dread. I remembered the 5th rule. Don't enter the teacher's lounge after midnight. I stood frozen, torn between the urge to run and the need to obey the rules. Every instinct in me screamed to keep moving, to get out of the school, but I couldn't ignore the rule. The door was open, and I had to follow the rules, right? I didn't know what I expected to find in there, but I had a feeling I wasn't ready for it. Slowly, I walked toward the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps stopped behind me, as if they were waiting for me to make my move. I reached for the doorknob, my fingers trembling, and pushed the door open just a crack. The room was dark, but I could see something in the corner. A figure hunched over, its back to me. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel its presence. The air felt colder, like I had stepped into another world. I took a step back, but my foot caught on something, and I stumbled. The figure turned toward me. Its face was pale, ghostly, and its eyes were wide open, too wide, almost like they were stretched beyond natural limits. I froze, rooted to the spot. I couldn't look away. The thing in front of me wasn't alive. It wasn't anything I could understand. But it was real, and it was staring straight at me, its mouth opening slightly, like it was about to speak. But before it could make a sound, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I whipped around, my heart nearly stopping. I was trapped. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't stop shaking. I needed to get out, but the teacher's lounge, the figure in the corner, it all felt like it was closing in on me, pulling me deeper into whatever nightmare this school had become. I fumbled for the doorknob, but the door wouldn't budge. It was like something was holding it shut from the other side. "Let me out!" I shouted, my voice cracking with panic, but there was no response. Only silence. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room. The furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust, the shadows creeping across the floor like they were alive. The faint hum of the lights overhead was the only sound, and it felt like it was getting louder, more oppressive. And then I saw it. The chalkboard. It was in the corner of the room, hidden in the shadows, almost as if it had been waiting for me. I couldn't stop myself from walking toward it. The moment my eyes locked on the board, I knew what I had to do. I had to clean it, just like the rule said. Always clean the chalkboard at midnight. My mind was foggy, my hands shaking as I grabbed the rag and chalk. I had to do it, even if it made no sense. The board was empty, and I quickly wiped it clean, erasing the invisible messages that had been there. But as I cleaned, the chalk started to move on its own. I froze. The chalkboard was writing something by itself. The message appeared in a jagged, uneven hand, as if someone, or something, was using it to communicate with me. I couldn't make out the words at first, but as the message became clearer, my blood ran cold. "You're not supposed to be here." The room seemed to close in around me, the shadows swallowing the space, and I could feel something dark, pressing in from all sides. I quickly grabbed the rag again, wiping the board harder, as if I could erase the words completely. But it didn't work. The chalk kept writing, faster now, almost like it was taunting me. I backed away from the board, but the words kept coming. They were all I could see, all I could think about. The walls of the room felt like they were shrinking, the air thick with dread. My breathing was ragged, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. And then I heard it again, the footsteps. But this time they were different. Slow, deliberate, like they were coming closer. I turned toward the door, my heart in my throat, but before I could make a move, the lights flickered violently above me. I knew it was the rule again. If the lights flicker, stop what you're doing. But it was too late. I had already broken it. I had already crossed the line. And I could feel the darkness closing in, the footsteps growing louder, and the chalkboard writing faster, as if it was marking my fate. There was no escape from this place. Not anymore. I couldn't escape the sense that something was closing in on me, something waiting for me to make a mistake, something ready to punish me for breaking the rules. My eyes kept darting back to the chalkboard, the words now flashing faster, almost like they were trying to draw my attention to them, to pull me into whatever nightmare this place had become. I couldn't stop myself from reading them. Even though I knew it was a mistake, I couldn't tear my eyes away. Someone will die tonight. The words were clear now, sharp and cold. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, and I was frozen. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but my voice caught in my throat, trapped by the oppressive air of the room. The footsteps in the hall were louder now, closer, like they were on the verge of breaking through the door. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. My breath hitched. No one came in here at this time of night. No one was supposed to be here. I backed away from the chalkboard, every part of me screaming to leave, to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a low, guttural voice from the other side. "Let me in, Ben." I froze. The voice, it was familiar. I knew it. It was the voice of the janitor who had been here before me, the one who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, the one I'd read about in the note. But how could it be him? How could it be? "Ben, open the door." The handle rattled. The voice came again, but this time it was different. There was something wrong with it, something hollow, something that made my stomach turn. I knew what I had to do. I knew the rule, the one I hadn't followed. If you hear footsteps behind you in the hallway when no one is there, stop and wait. But it was too late for that now. The door creaked open, and I was too slow to react. The figure in the hallway wasn't human anymore. It was a twisted version of the janitor, his face pale and distorted, eyes wide with a haunting emptiness. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My legs buckled beneath me, and I fell to the ground. The figure stepped closer, its hand reaching out toward me, its fingers long and skeletal. It spoke again, but its voice was no longer the voice I recognized. It was the voice of the school itself, twisted and broken. "You're next, Ben." And then everything went black. I woke up with a gasp, my chest heaving. My hands trembled as I pushed myself up from the cold, hard floor of the teacher's lounge. The air was thick with dust, the room as still and silent as it had been before, but there was something different. Something had changed. The chalkboard in the corner was still there, waiting. But when I looked at it, the message was gone, completely erased. There was nothing, just the same blank surface I had seen countless times before. I stumbled to my feet, dizzy, my mind spinning. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this nightmare. I rushed toward the door, but it wouldn't open. It was locked, just like before. I pounded on it, yelling for help, but no one came. The footsteps were gone, the voice was gone. But then I heard it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from the chalkboard. "You didn't follow the rules, Ben." The message appeared on the board, written in a jagged, almost frantic hand. I stepped back in horror as the words continued to form, faster now, like they were being forced into existence by some unseen force. "You broke the rules, Ben. Now you're one of us." I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, its fingers like ice, and I spun around. But there was no one there. The room was empty, except for me. The walls closed in around me, the air thick and suffocating. I could feel the presence of something ancient, something dark, pressing down on me, like the weight of the entire school was crushing me. And then, like a punch to the gut, I understood. The chalkboard hadn't just been showing the future. It had been marking my fate all along. The words had never been about someone else dying. They had been about me. I had followed the rules. I had cleaned the board, locked the windows, stopped when the lights flickered. But I had broken the most important rule of all. The one I hadn't even realized was a rule. You can never leave. And just like that, I knew it was over. The school had claimed me, just like it had claimed the janitor before me. The walls of the room began to close in, the shadows swallowing me whole, and I couldn't escape. The chalkboard glowed in the dim light, its final message clear. You're the new janitor now. And I realized with cold clarity, I would never leave this place. Not ever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for daily horror stories that get creepier every night.